talked about it in letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on...
You're listening to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week it's the Hollywood Studios Year by Year. We're going to be talking about Universal 1932.
That's right, Dave.
Actually, a very nice encapsulation of what Universal was specializing in the early 30s. We're starting out with a horror film and then moving into a state-of-the-art melodrama with John Stahl.
Well, in particular, a woman's picture or weepy melodrama.
Exactly.
They're all melodramas, aren't they?
Well, that's true. But the first film we're going to be discussing is Robert Florey's Murders in the Rue Morgue.
These were very disparate films in terms of tone.
Very much so.
And in terms of the identity of Universal as a studio, it's not really like there's some visionary that has an idea of the way things are going to go. It's more like there's individual directors doing individual projects and something becomes a hit and then they start doing a whole series of those, which is often true.
Well, that's how studios work.
Yeah, it's often true not just at studios, but it can be contagious across studios. But what was happening with horror at Universal didn't seem easy to reproduce elsewhere, although Karl Freund, who is the cinematographer on both of these films, did do Mad Love for MGM, which definitely has some of the flavor as a director.
Got his first chance to direct, I think, anyway. His first film was The Mummy at Universal. And then he moved over to that MGM venture and doesn't seem to have done a lot of directing.
Well, there's like...
Moved back to camera work mostly, though, didn't he?
I was looking it up. He did, 8, 9 films?
Yeah, but it stops at Mad Love. That's the end.
That's true, and definitely the culmination. I mean, I haven't seen any of these others, but that's the one that has a reputation, and it is a great film.
Well, The Mummy is great as well.
In terms of his cinematography, okay, now we're just talking about Karl Freund, I guess?
Well, we can start with Karl Freund
Why
and
not?
work our way back.
It's
Again,
important to the first film in particular.
I do want to talk about Robert Florey a bit, too, the actual director of Murders in the Rue Morgue. But
And I actually didn't look him up, so you can talk about him.
Start with Freund.
I forgot to. So, Freund famously worked on a number of German art films and was part of establishing the look of German Expressionism. He was also a very, well, by German art films, I'm referring to such things as Metropolis. He was also very instrumental, according to Wikipedia, in innovating practically every early development in cinematography that makes it into the art form that we know, such as the unchained camera, putting cameras on tracks. I think a few people did that. And putting cameras on cranes. I mean, this is just claiming everything for Karl Freund, but the one that comes up a lot is the unchained camera, taking it off the tripod. It's kind of sad that when he comes to Hollywood and works at Universal, he does some German Expressionist cinematography on their early horror films, on Dracula and Murders in the Rue Morgue. But after that,
well, The Kiss Before...
kind of very normal cinematography that he's doing, especially when he moves to MGM.
The Kiss Before the Mirror is a very interesting movie, which we are going to be doing.
Oh, okay, good.
Next time we come around to Universal in 1933.
So does he get another, it's a James Whale, does he get another opportunity to do some balls to the wall craziness there?
From what I remember, and it has been a long time, it is quite a sensational looking film.
But after that, he seems to just kind of be an A-list movie cinematographer more generally, which is kind of unfortunate.
He seems to have worked a lot with John M. Stahl, just looking at his late 30s stuff. He comes back and he works with him on Parnell, Letter of Introduction, So they obviously got along well.
So what do we want to say about Murders in the Rue Morgue? You want to talk about the director?
Yeah, Robert Florey, I've always really liked him. He was kind of a journeyman, often associated with the B unit at different studios. He winds up at Warner Brothers about a year after this. He does some cool, fast-paced crime films for them. His most famous film is probably this one, or I guess maybe even more famous, but no one would associate it with him, The Coconuts, the Marx Brothers film.
Okay.
But he really went on, and 30 years after this, he's still at it, and kind of in an interesting way, there are echoes of Murders in the Rue Morgue in his Twilight Zone episode, his best Twilight Zone episode, which is Perchance to Dream, which introduced Maya the cat lady at the carnival.
Yeah, that's a great.
It's an amazing episode.
Great episode.
And we start this one with a carnival as well. And he really gets the screen full of gyration and incident, perfect for evoking that carnival, that seedy carnival atmosphere.
This movie was really demented and sick.
It should be cancelled.
It was not just cancelled. It is one of the very sickest, most sadistic, Grand Guignol horror sex films of the 1930s, I would say. That's with things like The Black Cat and what are some other great ones from this period? Maybe it's just The Black Cat. Mad Love itself, of course.
Yeah, but I think the thing that comes closest to this is Island of Lost Souls, which we'll be doing soon, which is based on the island of Dr. Moreau, because both of those films have an impersonal maniac. He's not even driven by something as recognizable as some kind of sex fetishism. Or maybe it is, but
well,
it's
but
really...
definitely the filmmakers and viewers are driven by some sort of sex fetishism.
Yeah, but I find it even more disturbing that Bela Lugosi is just a scientist. Right? He really is.
Well, he has a mania. He has developed an obsession. That's, the scientist as the maniac type.
Yeah, for sure. And there are some echoes of Frankenstein in here as well, right? With the single-minded...
I found it, considering that the topic of this film is ape rape, I find it extraordinary that this was actually made before King Kong.
Oh, well, yeah, obviously this must have inspired King Kong. There's so much that...
Yeah, that makes sense, because King Kong's an original story.
Yeah, there's so much that gets magnified to gargantuan proportions in King Kong.
So to speak.
Yeah.
So, the Poe story is the story that I think introduces Dupin?
Is it the first Dupin story? I've read them all, but I don't remember which order they appear in.
I don't know. I can't, by glancing at Wikipedia here, I can't tell that. I have read it. I read, most of the Poe stories at some point in my life. It's a locked room mystery.
Exactly.
So the incidents do not unfold before our eyes, but the grisly details of the women's murders are in the story. At least the chimney. Actually, the murders are more gruesome in the story.
Sure.
I reread the plot summary. And it did inspire some really dubious, as you can see by going on the Wikipedia page, some really dubious illustrations.
But
whose spirit are definitely captured in this film.
There's no mad scientist in
No.
it. Yeah,
It's just Dupin solves the mystery.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all that happens after the fact.
Yeah, and, because that's what he always does. He's an armchair detective, right? Now, the Dupin in this film, played by Leon Ames, he's actually involved. He's the fiancé and a medical student. They just totally changed everything.
Well, yeah, they
get him more of a
into
stake.
the action. Yeah. Otherwise, it would be not much of a dramatic film. Following the mental processes of a great detective isn't quite so gripping in a film, unless you're going to make the detective himself the subject.
Right. Well, Sherlock Holmes went over fairly well, but that's mostly because of his friendship with Watson.
But
the mysteries aren't that exciting.
It wouldn't have been a horror film then.
No, not at all.
So they've turned this into a universal horror film. Is it like the beginning of the cycle? Like, other than, obviously, Dracula?
Well, Dracula and Frankenstein came before this, for sure.
But it's the beginning of their getting into the kind of gruesome Grand Guignol that Lugosi and Karloff together and separately would be involved in after their great debuts.
Yeah, like The Raven.
And The Black Cat, Elmer's The Black Cat, being still maybe the very best example, but this is pretty great.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's not pleasant.
It's beautiful, of course.
It really...
Both in the expressionist set design and in the cinematography.
No expense seems to have been spared in creating these sets.
Yeah.
They're very period appropriate as far as I can tell. The lighting, everything is just so to create a terrifying atmosphere.
Yeah, and just unspeakable sickness. So let's get into it.
Right, so we start with two couples having fun at a carnival in Paris. It's Bert Roach. And
It's actually this prologue that does get the film canceled. This prologue is canceled.
Oh, yeah.
It is racially canceled.
Sure, of course.
It's really horrible in a different way than the rest of the film.
Well, but it is all part of this
The
disturbing
racial hierarchy.
eugenics discourse.
And the eugenics, Darwinism, whatever.
And of course, this is set, and the story was written before Darwin, right? It's from the 1840s. But the conceit of the film, anyway...
And they've mashed it all together.
Yeah, is that there's a proto-Darwinian theorist who has some really strange ideas about evolution and how you can go back and forth along the scales.
And let's face it, miscegenation is the subtextual topic
absolutely.
of the film, of which the filmmakers are highly conscious.
I would say so, yeah.
I'm not sure how much they want the viewer to be consciously conscious of it.
More intending to generate frisson through bigotry and unconscious associations, right?
Yes.
But yeah, we do get the scene perfectly set with all of these different exhibits, which are just anthropological zoo-type events.
Yep, so there's the gyrating Arab beauties.
Yeah.
And then we move to the American Indians.
Film indulges in an origin story for the term Apache. They say, oh,
Right.
well, let's take that term and apply it to our ruffians over here. It's just really fucked up.
And these effete Europeans are, of course, ogling all of this and acting scandalized.
But also, yeah, very much eager to see more as much as they can.
And then we move on to the gorilla,
Yes.
an ape.
Well, they call him a gorilla.
They call him
yeah.
a gorilla. He's an orangutan in the story. Is it orangutan? I don't know who's what.
Yeah, an orangutan is not a gorilla, but they definitely call him a gorilla in the film.
When Bela Lugosi, as mad scientist / carnival exhibitor, tells the story of this gorilla, it is meant to evoke African slavery, how it was kidnapped by
Yeah.
hairless white apes and taken here, and now it's lonely. And by lonely, he means horny.
True, but he actually does have empathy for this.
Oh, he loves
Yeah.
the gorilla.
For Eric. It's the
Eric.
only person he cares about.
He is a person. They can talk to each other.
Yeah.
By the way, in the story, the motives of again, going by the Wikipedia recap, the motives of the orangutan are not sexual. He's just imitating humanity and pretending to be a barber, and the women somehow get confused because he's waving a razor around.
Sure,
And
that's...
so he reacts more like Frankenstein. It's when people are freaked out by him that he freaks out and gets violent, and
Right.
then wants to hide the evidence.
Bit of trivia I should mention. The original director and star for Frankenstein were Robert Florey and Bela Lugosi. And then there was a change of plan, and Universal shifted Whale and Karloff into those
Well,
slots.
it would have been different. Maybe
Yeah.
it would have been just as good.
We'll never know.
It would have been very different.
Lugosi didn't really want to do it because it didn't have any lines, hardly.
No,
Right?
and then Karloff, of course, famously got very attached to using only his body
Yeah.
and grunts.
But Lugosi gets a chance to be quite verbose in this film.
But he does quite a lot of body acting, too.
Oh, yeah.
It's obviously highly stylized, everything he's doing.
Yeah, but he enjoys declaiming from the stage.
There seems to be no gap at all between this and his work for Ed Wood.
It's all great.
When he does that long monologue at the beginning, that
Vive.
cheesy long monologue, and he's wearing, he's kind of a sexy man in Dracula, but here he's got a monobrow.
Yeah, they've really...
They've unsexed him.
And then the next movie he made is Island of Lost Souls, where he is a wolfman kind of thing, a dog.
He seems to be growing into the Wolfman.
Half man,
and
half beast!
He has an assistant that we never get a good look at, but kind of looks like he might be a Wolfman.
Yeah, well, he's like a Lothar type, yeah.
Dr. Miracla
It's a real low-budget operation that he's running here. He is his own usher, and he's the one that says, sit up front, my dear, so you can get a good look. And we've already got some tension there. There's a little bit more, too much attention paid to little Sydney Fox, Leon Ames' girlfriend.
Yeah. Of the two couples, there's also a comedy couple.
Yeah, Bert Roach.
The girl is just as pretty, but then she is affianced to
with
Bert Roach, who is in a homoerotic domestic situation with Leon Ames.
Yeah, well, they're medical students.
Right,
so
that's how it happens.
Roommates.
They can't have sex with anybody yet, so they just shack up and play house.
They make spaghetti.
Share the rent.
Or Bert makes spaghetti, and Leon just
refuses to eat it.
He just can't stop fiddling around with ape blood.
So there's this great illustration behind that somebody drew for the set. Somebody created this behind Bela Lugosi of our emergence from sea anemones or whatever.
Yeah, the primordial slime.
And the growing of the legs and the standing on the legs and all of that stuff.
All that's accurate.
All that business.
Now, one thing that someone post-Darwin could have told Bela Lugosi or Dr. Miracle is that we didn't evolve from gorillas. We evolved from a common ancestor that may have been something like a gorilla and something like a human, but we've split too far off from them to mate with them. So this is a doomed project from the start.
In addition to the white gaze racial metaphor, which Val Lewton, does a lot with in his horror films, in a way that is a little more woke than this.
Much more, yeah.
There's also the metaphor of, obviously, the Freudian id and how the gorilla, how we are all, us fancy Europeans, are still half a step away from this lonely cage brute.
It all has great poetical purchase upon the mind, but scientifically none.
Upon the white mind.
Yeah. The intended viewers of this film, yes.
Right.
He declares loudly to everyone assembled that he will join Eric with someone. He will join Eric's blood with someone. And I don't know, that sounds like it's amazing that he hasn't been arrested yet. He's not making any secret, really, of his intentions. All he gets are objections from the crowd saying that they don't...
religious base.
Unfortunately, he comes out looking better than his...
He does, yeah.
Interlocutor in the...
He's sympathetic initially.
Well, yeah, he is. It's a nice trick that they pull on you there. Because, we meet him at his absolute best. Shouting down stiff-necked conservative Christians and really deeply empathizing with the plight of his friend Eric, who's in a cage.
Wouldn't many intended viewers of this film be sympathizing with the people who are telling him to shut up?
It's an interesting question. I think probably there would have still been quite a lot of people, yes, especially in the South at that time, who would have been rejecting Darwinism.
I don't know what the South would do with this movie, to tell you any of it, to tell you the truth.
Well, it's always hard to know anything about what was going on with Universal Films, because Universal was the major studio that did not have its own chain of theaters, so they were dependent upon any exhibitor that would take their product, mostly second-run exhibitors. They had a big premiere in New York City. They would have to get one of the studios that had a picture palace to rent them space so that they could show it. So they found a way to show their movies across North America, as far as I know, but we don't have any real hard data that's easy to access about where they were targeting. I guess you have to assume they were mostly going after less ritzy clientele because they depended primarily on second-run theaters.
Even in the rural Midwest, this might come off as a little bit too radical in 1932.
Even at his best, Dr. Miracle is already causing a problem by quoting Darwin at people.
So, once he brings out Eric, and by the way, what's with that name? Is that some kind of on-set in-joke or writer's in-joke? Who knows?
I don't know.
Eric the gorilla is our murderer. Well, one of our murderers. Once he brings out Eric, everybody runs away except the two protagonist couples.
And Leon Ames, he is being positioned for us already as the stalwart hero. Our foursome approaches the cage. And here, Eric spies his Fey Ray.
Well, somebody had better be a stalwart hero because the innocent victim is such an idiot that Leon Ames is the only person doing any thinking in the entire movie, other than Dr. Miracle.
Well, see, that's consistent
and
with
Eric.
it's consistent with the Poe story because it's all about the workings of Dupin's mind.
This is the point where they all approach the cage, and Eric also shows an inordinate interest in... What is her name?
Well, Sydney Fox is the actress. Camille de l'Espanaye. He grabs her bonnet and fondles it like a fetish.
Yeah, like the Fey Ray panties.
Yeah, he's not giving it back. There's a kind of deep bond, at least on Eric's side, that builds right away there. He's immediately smitten with Sydney Fox.
It's not on Camille's side. No.
And he realizes that she's already taken by Leon Ames.
Oh yeah, he understands everything.
And so he immediately tries to throttle Dupin.
Bela Lugosi, incidentally, when he's demonstrating talking to...
I think he must be speaking Hungarian.
Eric, do you think he's speaking Hungarian? I was wondering if he was speaking Hungarian or just babbling, because I wasn't sure.
I think Bela Lugosi spoke many languages, actually, so he might have just picked one. Or sure, maybe he invented some words.
It kind of sounded like baby talk, but I guess I've just insulted somebody who knows what the language is. He asked the audience if they... Because language is going to become important at another point in the movie. He asked the audience if they themselves have forgotten the language of Eric. He has not.
Well, he's relearned it.
That's right. That's right.
He had forgotten it. He was just like everyone else, but he's made an effort.
But it was once the universal language of humans, apparently.
It's atavism. This is where he's gone completely wrong. Again, he believes that Eric and human beings are the same ultimately. There's just been some superficial changes that have occurred. So we all speak the same language originally, we all can mate, and this is not, unfortunately, the case, as many will find to their horror.
Right, of course. I didn't look up whether this comes before or after Mamoulian's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Well, it's the same year.
Which is the supreme great sadistic horror movie about, a radical scientist who is studying the id that operates the animal inside of man and then, himself succumbs to it, etc., etc.
Well, it's true, but this one, again,
And he turns into a version of an ape.
Well, he does, yeah, that's the difference, right? Like, he's personally implicated, he's involved in the ape-like behavior.
Well, Bela Lugosi is definitely rape enabler here.
Oh yeah, he is.
He's pretty implicated.
He's implicated, but not in the behavior, just in the mission.
Sure. He wants to demonstrate that the blood is compatible, and that will prove Darwin. It will prove evolutionary theory.
Yeah, but you really don't need to do this.
It doesn't make any sense what he's doing.
No.
Or how he's doing it.
No, he's a really misguided scientist. You can understand why he doesn't have a job at a university or any kind of reputable foundation. He's working at a carnival. He tells everyone right away, I'm not one of these sideshow barkers. If you're here for that, get out.
So soon after this, there's a whole thing about he wants to replace the bonnet, which means he really just wants to get the address of Camille. And he has his henchmen follow her when she would happily give it, but Leon Ames thinks it's maybe not a good idea.
Why give out your address like that?
To a creepy guy and his violent gorilla.
Yeah. Best to wash your hands of this whole thing. We've had an interesting experience, and my throat is still intact. Let's get out of here.
And then nearly the next thing we see is a very gruesome fight on a foggy street. Is Paris famously foggy? There's a lot of fog.
Most cities in the 19th century were foggy because they're of pollution, right?
Yeah, it's really more associated with London, of course.
It is, but no, I do think any industrialized or even semi-industrialized city would have these terrifying fogs.
In the midst of this fog, two men are slicing each other up on a street.
And a woman is screaming. She is perhaps the person they're fighting over. We don't really know the backstory of all of this. But yeah, they kill each other, ultimately.
Yeah, I think they're fighting over her, but I don't know who they are.
No.
Because she is a sex worker.
Yeah, they may be two pimps or something, or customers.
Two Johns, or
yeah.
a John and a pimp, we don't know.
We'll never find out because they knife each other to death.
Yeah, and while she's still shrieking over this, she is approached by something worse, which is Bela Lugosi.
Now here he goes into full Dracula mode.
Yeah.
And says that he will take her into his carriage. He doesn't even need supernatural hypnotism. He just relies on the persuasive power of his coach.
So now they're borrowing from Jack the Ripper.
Yes.
And also, of course, the ongoing problem of sex workers, often of color in North America, being targeted by serial killers and individual killers because the police don't pay any attention.
Yeah, well, this is something that goes back to the dawn of human history, I'm sure.
And
anyone who's operating in any way outside of the law, no matter how unjust those laws are, is really in danger of being preyed upon by
Maniacs.
seemingly respectable people.
Well, yes, it's true. They don't even have to be maniacs. The fullest representation of that being in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
But this is pretty full as well, because this goes well beyond the usual Jack the Ripper type shit. I mean, he's got this cross set up that he ties people up on.
He starts doing whatever he's doing to her to torture her is very obscure. We don't get like a full visual representation, but we get some really great female screams throughout this whole movie.
We do find out what he's doing. It's true, as he is lecturing her.
Yes, but we don't know exactly. I mean, I guess he's
injecting her with Eric's blood, because if there's a reaction...
But we don't exactly see how it's going. It's like worse initially because we're not shown just what he's doing.
That's right. He's writing his notes, and that's where we find out exactly what killed her eventually, is that he's trying to find a compatible subject to mate with Eric. And, it's not going to work unless Eric's blood won't kill them, because you have to be able to transfuse blood, I guess. In this movie, anyway, that's what it means to be sexually compatible. I don't think that that's exactly how that works.
Well, I think I think the rape stuff is just subtext. I don't think he wants to mate them.
Yes, he does.
I thought he just wanted that because that's like Eric had a crush. I didn't think this was his ultimate goal. I thought his ultimate goal was just to show that someone could survive with both bloods in them.
I suppose. I don't know.
I'm confused about what his goal is.
I've always thought that his goal was to find someone who could absorb the blood so that then she could carry Eric's child.
He does not say. That's your own
I don't know.
Fiction,
that's
Dave.
what I've assumed.
Sorry. It's gonna be like Rosemary's Baby with the gorilla?
Well, obviously it's doomed to failure, so it's never gonna happen. I
have to mention that the first shot, we don't first see her on the cross, we see her shadow on the cross. It is shot to look like she's naked.
Yeah.
But she's not. My favorite touch was that after he realizes he's killed her, well, first of all, he freaks out because she's got syphilis.
Her blood is impure!
And he, harangues her about it because of her sins.
Yeah.
And then when he realizes she's died, he is shocked and becomes contrite.
Yeah, he's crushed.
But apparently this has happened a lot because he's got a trap door ready for the bodies to dispose of them. But every time it happens, he's sad that the woman has expired under the exertions of his experiment.
Yeah, that's exactly what makes it all the more chilling, right? He's so dissociated. Really disturbing, this film.
And yet...
He's not getting any pleasure out of killing these people, clearly, so, you don't even get that kind of catharsis of, an ultimately diabolical person. He's just this rationalistic monster.
No more than when I watch a David Lynch movie can I explain to you why this is all so great. Because it's just amazing. Every stylized gesture of horror and Sadian pornographic illusion. It's just fantastic. I don't like the really detailed fleshy. It's the suggestion, because the really kind of detailed, fleshy, full color, everybody actually nude art film versions of this sort of thing in the 70s, I just have no use for.
No, who wants that?
You want the sly, perverse suggestion. That's what you want.
Yeah, that's right.
While everything looks beautiful and distorted.
That's why Robert Florey's Perchance to Dream is one of the best horror type things of the late 50s, early 60s. Remaining true to that waning art. So as you say, they just drop her into the Seine. That's what he does with his rejects.
And then we get a kind of Dickensian scene where a old hag under the bridge with her fellow homeless people, with her teeth rotting out of her head. They comment on all the women, the prostitutes being pulled out, dead, and has a little poetic speech about the river cradling them, rocking them to sleep or some shit.
It gives them peace. A very bleak worldview is being expressed here. Although, whenever it rejoins Dupin, you get the sprightly
Dupin?
energy.
Actually, his name?
Yeah, they call him Dupin, Pierre Dupin.
I didn't even notice that in the whole film.
It's Leon Ames' name, the character's name. But again, he's nothing like the Dupin in the Poe stories, who is a Sherlock Holmes type detective. He's onto this right from the start. He doesn't put everything together, but he is...
You would have to be a moron to not realize something is up with Dr. Miracula, but apparently everybody except Dupin is a moron.
On the other hand, what could he be up to? He's ranting about scientific stuff, but you don't necessarily go from that to dead women in the Seine. And the thing about it is, the movie makes it fairly clear that this is happening all the time. It's not Dr. Miracle that's killing all women in the city. It's just always going on.
This is just recent.
There has been a spate of similar incidents. And the city and the constabulary, they don't care enough, right? They just write them all off as drowning victims. They don't do real autopsies. And Dupin has taken an interest in this recent cluster of cases. And he actually bribes officials to get those bodies out of there so he can take a look at them. And he does find that, no, they're not drowned. They were killed before going into the river. Now he starts to think, what might be the cause. He still doesn't know that it's Dr. Miracle.
Right, and nobody, as you say, nobody cares to solve these crimes, just as we were talking about earlier.
Only Dupin.
Doesn't matter.
Only Dupin is interested.
His lives
these
do not
cases.
matter. We're going back to, sorry, I forgot to mention one detail from the torture scene, which is that it ends with a shot of the woman's hanging feet, which is also in Robert Eldrick's Kiss Me Deadly.
Yeah, Cloris Leachman.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is about seeing a tortured woman's feet hanging, but there's something really, really awful about it. And she is supposed to be naked in that scene, Cloris Leachman.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on.
We have a couple of little interludes on the sunnier side of life with the bourgeois family that Sidney Fox belongs to and the aspiring bourgeois lifestyle of the medical students. So they seem to be having a good time at their little garret. And whenever he pops over to visit Camille, she has a wonderful place, and he makes a few little speeches about how delightful she is.
And as in the story, she seems to live there only with her mother in this apartment.
Yeah.
There's a picnic
Yes.
that everybody's going to go to. And before that, Camille gets a bonnet delivered to her, and she is so fucking happy about this bonnet.
It's a nice bonnet.
It's an afterthought who sent it to her, and when it turns out to be Dr. Miracula, she and her mother, only as a remote afterthought, wonder how he got their address.
Well, they don't really care, and it does seem like she's considering going to see him. And Leon Ames says, no, I think that's a bad idea. I will go visit him. Now,
she is an absolutely ripe victim who is just set up for us to kind of hope that she gets attacked.
Well, I know. I didn't feel that way about it.
She deserves it.
Oh,
she
come on.
100% deserves it.
She's very trusting.
Exactly. That's why she deserves it.
Ah.
Women have to be canny in horror movies.
It's a good survival instinct.
The highlighted innocence is what makes a victim more delectable.
To Eric.
That's why you want her to be attacked, not because
Yeah.
she deserves it, but because she's more delectable. No, to the attacker and to the sadistic viewer.
Right. Leon Ames tries to head this off at the pass. He goes to visit the carnival, and he barges in on Lugosi, and they have an exchange. And Lugosi says, well, we're leaving tonight, so should set Dupin's mind at ease, at least. This freak is going off to another city to threaten other people.
Right.
But it's all a lie. Lugosi is playing a double game here, and he is going to stay in his lair until he gets a hold of Camille, because he's convinced she's the only one for Eric.
We haven't mentioned that he goes around the city in his carriage with Eric.
Yeah.
With Eric. And we get to see Eric's furry arm sticking out of the coach a few times. Nice, surreal touch.
My son, with whom I share no blood.
Not for lack of trying, though.
No. I mean, Eric seems to be very well behaved.
That's a political reference that's going to date.
Maybe a few Rue Morgue heads will give me a few pity likes.
We're going to talk about the picnic, because it's amazing. Absolutely gorgeous. So this decadent playing at pastoralism of these Parisians is the delicately beautiful flip side of the horror of everything else that we've seen, so it just adds even more to the atmosphere of the movie. And there is a remarkable sequence of shots, or one shot, or I don't know what it is, of her on the flower swing, where it looks like you notice that, right? That crazy shot? It looks like the camera is positioned above, because it looks like Eric is down below as she's coming toward the camera on the swing, but then when it stops, the camera's at the bottom, so I'm sure that's very easy to do, but it's not a kind of photography that I'm used to seeing.
No, it's not
cinema.
something you see every day. Karl Freund was certainly innovative.
Yeah, it's amazing.
These people have everything to live for if they could only pay attention to gorillas in their midst.
If they could only pay attention to the horror or have any cognizance of the horror that awaits them all. Their lives are not like the lives of the sex workers or the people under the bridge.
And Dr. Miracle is entering dangerous waters for him, because he's been able to get away with anything he's been doing up to now, because he's been preying on people that society has forsaken already.
Right.
But once you get into the middle class, it's a different ball game.
So when she won't go to him, he comes to her at night in her bedroom, but he's not interested in attacking her, although obviously it freaks her out.
Yeah, this is another thing that I just love so much about this movie. He is really not a capable villain. Right, he is an absent-minded scientist. He's just taken for all he's willing to do himself is try to talk people into getting into his carriage. Once he gets them home, then he'll start injecting them with poisonous blood and kill them. But he doesn't seem to ever consider manhandling people.
It's true, like, he is large. Well, I mean, okay, it's an apartment. She says she's going to scream.
Yeah.
He really can't do a lot. But a more capable villain in a horror movie could do better than this, I think.
Yeah, no, he really just...
He could inject her right there, I mean...
He would not make it very far as a door-to-door salesman. It feels like a failed attempt to sell a washing machine. This
tiny little girl, just gets fed up and closes the door on him, and that's it.
Yeah, and he walks off sulkily. His backup plan is to just send Eric in after her.
Yeah, and I mean, that could be why he doesn't make a better attempt, really.
Let Eric take the risks.
Yeah, Eric kind of balls things up a bit by by murdering the mother. That really wasn't anticipated, I don't think.
No, it wasn't
necessary. He's just supposed to kidnap, I think.
Yeah.
Although, given that Bela Lugosi knows how fond he is of this girl, well, it's true, he doesn't try anything. He does obediently just take her to his master, or his friend, or whatever. Then he gets rapey.
Yeah.
He finally gets fed up. Because I think he thinks he's going to bring her back, and then he's going to get an opportunity.
And then he's like, what's all this shit with blood tests?
Yeah, exactly. We get some nice shots of the girl in her bed as Eric approaches, and, the cross above her bed that's not going to go very far to protecting her.
There's no power on earth or in heaven that's going to protect her from Eric, except possibly Dupin.
He's doing a race against time here.
All of this is so unnecessary. Dupin knows exactly what needs to be done, and he's prevented by this insane detour through the court system and the totally ineffectual...
Oh, you mean after? I was talking about when he's running to her rescue.
Oh, sure, but he fails to get there.
Yeah,
and
he's also very ineffectual. And the whole town is roused by the women's screams.
Yeah.
Some more very excellent screams. Blood-curdling.
They could have saved her so easily if they would just have listened to Dupin in the first place. But instead, the police arrest him because he's her boyfriend. And this is from the story. When they get to the court and they have all these witnesses talking about the different languages they think they heard, that's the only thing I remember from the Dupin story.
Yes.
Which is that everyone is assuming it's a different language they don't understand.
I don't know what the tone is in the story, but because here it's played as black comedy. I don't know if they thought that some comic relief was necessary at this point. It's like Mittel European.
Again, I haven't read the story in a long time, but I think Dupin is mildly amused by all of this. In all of the stories, he's kind of superior and just sort of drawing his conclusions.
If no one could understand what the language was, if everyone thought it was different, clearly it was not a human language.
That's right. It was a babbling ape.
Of course. But you did not mention the detail of the woman. We do get to see kind of obscured glimpses of the woman hanging from the chimney when Ames runs over and opens the chimney and the hair is hanging there.
Yeah.
Which is pretty effectively gruesome. And then we get a shot from inside the chimney.
All of this...
It's really, really awful.
It is. It is.
I don't know, of course I'm going to sound like a big nerd, but I find all of this stuff so much more effective than really gory, gruesome horror movies because it's so much more perverse.
And the workings of justice are also perverse. The only thing that saves Camille's life is that eventually Dupin realizes that if he can show them that there's ape hair clutched in the hands of the dead woman, they will have to listen to him.
Sure, yeah.
Because other than that, nobody's listening to anything he says, right?
Well, the boyfriend is always the first suspect. Although, exactly how he could have done this, especially when
everyone saw him outside the door, locked outside the door.
Literally the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, so the police are completely useless.
Yes, they are.
But yeah, when they find the mother's body, she's got ape hair, gorilla hair in her dead hand. Everyone is like, okay, I guess maybe there's something to what he's been saying. Let's go find this.
It is true that what he's saying sounds crazy.
Well, yeah, that's true. So they all head down to the abandoned carnival grounds, and again, everyone's ready to go home when they realize it's been boarded up, and only Dupin's insistence keeps them on the hunt for this madman.
We see Camille, who spends most of the rest of the movie passed out.
Yeah.
We see her in the laboratory, and as I said, this is where Eric gets excited and decides he's going to defy Bela Lugosi because he's waited long enough.
This is where the mad scientist gets hoisted by his own petard.
Yeah, and we see the death in shadow of Bela Lugosi, which is very balletic.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Hunchback guy...
He just gets shot.
Yeah, he's trying to block the door, and the police just give up on trying to barge through and just shoot him through the door.
The end of him. We've never really gotten to know you.
No.
And now you're gone.
But he's certainly been a willing participant in covering up all these murders.
Who is the, oh yes, it's the Bride of Frankenstein little creep who goes and...
Dwight Fry.
Who kills a sex worker to get a fresh body, to get a fresh heart.
Yep.
That's like the best version of the henchman, I think.
Well, there's also Igor, played by the great Bela Lugosi himself in...
What does he do that's so great as a henchman?
Oh, you have to see The Son of Frankenstein. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a 1939
It's
film.
a good one. Yeah, there's a lot of bad ones,
it's
right?
Pretty good. Lionel Atwill is in it, too, as a guy with a fake hand. Anyway, maybe we'll do that in Universal 1939. Once that all happens, it basically comes down to a chase across the Paris rooftops.
Yeah, which is very, very evocative of King Kong.
Yeah, or generative of King Kong.
Exactly.
Leon Ames, again, is the one that takes the initiative to chase Eric, and he does have a gun at this point. It's kind of a mismatch.
Very lucky that Tinkerbell wakes up in time to not fall off the roof.
Yeah. So she's hanging from the roof, and Eric gets shot dead. She is saved by her beloved Dupin.
Yeah. And luckily it's a very perfunctory chase and dispatch because it could drag on.
The movie is 62 minutes
But Eric
long.
really... Okay, so Eric is not so great. He's a rapist, but he really doesn't get... Everyone else, even Bela Lugosi, gets a kind of great death. Well, not the henchman. But he just falls. That's it. I mean,
he takes one bullet and he's down.
Yeah, you could have got more out of that, I feel.
Dupin is
Florey.
an expert shot. Well, yeah, King Kong certainly milks the pathos of the ape's death for a lot more value than this one does. Yeah. King Kong's a very interesting movie.
It is.
We won't be doing it on this go-around in RKO, but someday I'm sure we'll do it.
It's over famous, but got its interest.
What did you think of Leon Ames in this movie? He's credited as Leon Wyckoff. Presumably that's his real name, and he changed it to Ames. Now, he's a very familiar character actor that we see all the time. You know him, right? Well, he's the dad in Meet Me in St. Louis. And
right. What did I think of him? Well, I mean, we didn't kind of get into how he's made to be kind of a parallel to Dr. Miracle.
He's gleefully into his scientific pursuits, just as monomaniacally almost as Bela Lugosi himself. Bert Roach is annoyed with him because he won't even eat his spaghetti.
Which seems like a interesting commentary on the Dupin type. Kind of like a Star Trek ending.
Yeah, the ending really is kind of... They register the death of Dr. Miracle, and they say, who cares how old he was, or whatever his fucking profession was. He's dead now. He's out of our hair. But
yeah, but these are the same officials who have been so ineffective for the entire...
Yeah, these people should not be running society. They are terrible, doing nothing for anyone.
There should have been a moment for a greater word about both Eric and Dr. Miracle, but we're not going to get it from these guys.
No, Dr. Miracle, when did he get off track? He was... his thinking could have been a great boon to science. He was so far ahead of Darwin.
But anyway, I guess Leon Ames has found a better outlet for his excellent reasoning skills, which is to be an amateur mystery solver.
Ratiocinative coroner type.
So this is like a alternate universe Dupin.
Yeah.
Who's also a medical student and a family man.
I'm just fascinated by how his career went, right? Because...
Leon Ames?
Yeah.
Not Dupin.
This is like a starring role, practically.
It's his third film.
And I don't think he ever starred in another movie again.
Well, it's not like an awesome acting role or anything.
No, but you think he could have built on it from there, but it seems like he went backward, and he's got a lot of parts where he's just uncredited, and then he resurfaces as a really valuable MGM character actor later on.
Yeah, by the time he's in Only Yesterday in 1933, he's like in there's like a whole bunch of uncredited roles.
Yeah, it's really strange. I'd like to know more about him.
I don't know how well this movie did.
I think it did okay. But anyway, he lasted forever in Hollywood. I mean, he's in Peggy Sue Got Married as Grandpa. A kind of false start for one of my favorite character actors here, as a dashing hero type.
I'm just seeing the critical reception on the film's release was harsh, according to the book Universal Horrors.
But did it make money?
Apparently they thought the cast was overacting. Who's overacting? Nobody's overacting. Bela Lugosi's overacting. but that's what he does.
Yeah.
Nobody else is overacting. Doesn't say box office. Let's see. Oh, censors. Censors didn't like some of this. Abbreviated the death scenes of the woman of the streets. Okay, fair enough. And eliminated shots of her stabbing. Well, she's not really stabbed. And of her tied up in a lavatory. Okay, so all that good stuff was cut out by some censors. The dancing girls and the elements of the plot where it suggests man evolved from apes were cut out by some other censor boards. I don't know if some of them were from the South. I'm not going to look up the footnote, but you can investigate that for yourself if you want.
Sidney Fox, too, was an important contract actress at Universal. Her career kind of peters out as well. I've seen her in a few other things. I think she's always fairly good, but yeah, it doesn't seem to have worked out for her. She didn't have a second act as a character actor, as far as I know, either. And Bela Lugosi, well...
We know what happened with him.
We know. Now, he's not nearly at the end of his rope yet, but perhaps all...
This is his second movie after Dracula.
Yeah.
How could it be the end of his rope?
Well...
Also, Black Cat.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. The Black Cat is still to come, but after that, it gets worse and worse for him, right?
It doesn't do that well for Karloff either, after The Bride of Frankenstein and The Black Cat.
Well, no, Karloff, though, has all kinds of other successes to come.
Like what?
Like a 3-year run on Broadway in Arsenic and Old Lace, or 4 year.
Okay, well, if you're not talking about film, Lugosi couldn't return to the stage. He had a lot of trouble. I mean, it has been in part attributed to his accent.
You always read that he was delivering lines phonetically. There's no way. There's a lot of intention and thought behind everything he's saying.
Well, not only that, that's a long and intricate speech that he gives.
Yeah, exactly.
It's nonsense. It's like xenophobic nonsense.
Yeah.
Whenever you hear that about an actor, pretty much, like a star. Anna Magnani gets it a lot. She apparently was not happy with how much English she could speak, but who knows what her standards were.
Sure, everyone's a perfectionist. But no, Lugosi is a genuinely great actor, I think. I'm always going to stand up for Lugosi no matter what.
Well, no one else plays the kind of roles he plays.
No one can, right? I mean, how can you be so demonically focused on sharing blood between human women and apes, and also convincingly break down and kneel before the person that you've killed as if you had no intention of this ever going this way.
Yeah, and then tell your henchman to open the trapdoor and dispose of it. Dispose of it. He calls her it.
Yeah, it's an incredible performance because all of it seems believable, and it shouldn't, because this is such a fractured person that I don't understand how they could even exist from day to day and moment to moment.
You're right. He really thought the psycho in this movie really ought to be up there with the psycho played by Karloff in The Black Cat. Your blood is impure from your sins. What? You're dead? You are dead?
Oh god, it's so crazy.
Okay.
It's the stuff of nightmares.
Time for John M. Stahl.
Onward to Backstreet by John M. Stahl.
So, this film starts a series of women's pictures weepies that Stahl does at Universal, many of them starring Irene Dunne.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in the Wikipedia entry on Symphony of 6 Million, which we did for our RKO episode. It established her as a rising star, and she was selected for Backstreet, also a Fannie Hurst property. On that basis, they were made in the same year, but movies were made quickly then.
They sure were.
And yes, this made her into a big star of the Weepies, and it made John Stahl into a big star of the Weepies. Now,
Stahl, I've been reading a book I picked up last year, The Call of the Heart, John M. Stahl and Hollywood Melodrama.
You picked that up at the Tiff Lightbox bookstore.
There's a lot of work being done behind the scenes these days on bringing to light the backstory for John M. Stahl. He was a very well-regarded director during the silent era.
Right, and almost look at this filmography. Almost looks like more than half of the films are lost.
Well, none of them are available to people, even with the kinds of resources I call upon at times.
Yes, he's kind of like a Dr. Miracle, a film getting.
There are 10 to 15 silents that have now been discovered, but they're all only viewable in archives on like 16 or 35 millimeter.
Why?
Well, that's part of the reason the book was written, because they're hoping to push for digital releases of these lost films, formerly lost films, or totally unavailable films, so that a better sense of continuity can be built.
A better case for him as an auteur can be made.
He did a lot of marital dramas in the 20s. People that worked on this book, they actually have seen a lot of these. There is a lot of continuity. And the other thing that sort of hampered him as an auteur is that he kind of had a hiatus from directing right at the crucial moment, right when sound came in. He became a producer / co-mogul for a while, from like 1928 to 1930, and then returned. And people seem to have had trouble seeing any kind of cohesion in his work, whereas I think should be pretty clear, even without those silent movies. He did have this pedigree. He had already been doing it in the 20s, although they argue that he had definitely refined it and brought an interesting light touch that had not been common in melodramas before Stahl, right? Because you're thinking more of like the D.W. Griffith kind of melodrama.
So you think he established the sort of pedestrian, what you call it, pedestrian weepy that, Frank Capra would also kind of make with Barbara Stanwyck?
Well, he's in there right at the beginning of this, so that's certainly what the book is arguing.
The more, I guess you could call it, social realism weepy?
With nice, muted performances, relatable characters. When you meet them, the interesting thing about them is that when you meet them, they could be in any kind of movie, right? Like Irene Dunne, when you first meet her, she could be headed for a screwball comedy.
In fact, that early version of her character made me think of the final segment of The Awful Truth as a kind of a callback, as well as a callback to maybe Showboat.
Yeah, it's no accident that Irene Dunne would later go on to become even more famous for her incredible work in screwball comedy. So she can do anything, and all of that is folded into her character here. It's a very multivalent performance.
For sure.
This is not a Lillian Gish fresh tragedy. Much as I enjoy those, this is a totally different kind of outlook on tragic events befalling women in society.
Backstreet is still a very famous film.
It is, but also very hard to find.
Right, and the version that we saw had some sound problems, and we couldn't find any other.
It looked pretty good, though.
Yeah, was able to kind of teach my ears to learn what they were saying by the end. So that's one way in which he's known, through that film, through Only Yesterday with Margaret Sullivan. Also, he's known because Cirque remade a bunch of his films at the behest of Ross Hunter in the 50s, and the Cirque versions are better known to tourists, right? But people kind of got an interest in comparing the two. That article on Cirque that we read from the 70s from Film Comment, James Harvey's article.
Yeah, a wonderful writer.
It did make it sound as though some auteurist consideration had been given to Stahl as well, that he was also respected by critics.
Not by Cirque, because Cirque didn't watch his movies, so he didn't have an opinion one way or another, but he kind of makes it seem like he didn't have time for such nonsense.
So as a very big fan of women's pictures, I watched a lot of these in my 20s. The ones that Cirque remade, I mean, the styles are so wildly different that I didn't really appreciate them. On subsequent viewings, I'm more and more appreciating Imitation of Life, and we do have that scheduled, 5-year upcoming schedule or whatever it is now. We do have that scheduled to watch them both together. Backstreet, now interesting about Backstreet.
It was remade as well, so that's another thing.
It was remade with Margaret Sullivan.
One of the things that the authors argue is that a lot of Stahl auteurism was derailed by the unavailability of his older films because they had all been remade.
So we'll be
Backstreet was remade. Only Yesterday was remade by Universal as Letter from an Unknown Woman. Then you've got all those ones that were remade by Cirque. There's almost nothing left at that point.
Right.
Probably the movie he's most famous for now amongst cinephiles is Leave Her to Heaven.
Oh yeah, of course. So that's the wild card from the 1940s, done in a completely different style, in a much more, shall we say, in-your-face, more Circean style, where the style is jumping out at you more than anything. That crazy shit's happening in that film, so I can't say more than anything that's happening in the film. Which is not at all like it's completely at odds with his style, his non-style of the 30s.
I think there's something to thinking about Leave Her to Heaven. I'm not saying that the readings of it that exist are not valuable, and they are probably correct, but I do find more and more an interesting way into it to graft it back onto Stahl auteurism, is to think about Jean Crane's character in that movie as Stahl protagonist who gets caught up in this craziness.
If you like.
I really like that character.
I know you do. The girl with the hoe, she makes things grow. The other one kills things.
No, but not only that, she's just got a kind of bemused attitude towards all this insanity. It's really interesting. She's not the usual drab alternative to the maniacal femme fatale.
Well, I mean, you could make an argument that she is the 30s character.
Exactly.
Grafted onto this overheated 1940s noir.
Well, that's what I'm saying, yeah. I'm not saying the movie's primarily about her, but she's kind of a through line. That's kind of like an Irene Dunn character who finds herself in this weird Technicolor murder melodrama.
And I don't know anything about his movies from the 1940s, so I'm missing that chunk of his
Well, we're
career.
probably gonna explore a lot of those as we go through the decades. The one that I haven't seen is Our Wife. I've always been interested in that. Another one from the 30s that we really should see, sooner rather than later is Strictly Dishonorable, because that's the adaptation of the Sturgis play.
First play that was a hit.
Yeah.
And he did some more that were not hit. This movie has another pedigree, which is Fannie Hurst.
Yeah, friend of the show, Fannie Hurst.
I decided to buy the novel because you can get it for $10.99 in various ebook editions.
Oh, you got an ebook.
Canadian, yeah. It's quick.
Cool.
It's quick. You don't have to wait for it to be mailed. It's also cheap. Also, I fall asleep when I read print books now, but I can stay awake forever reading on my screen because it's one of the only two that are in print.
Right.
The other one being Imitation of Life, which, as we said, we have that. That's going to be a special subject. And I was just looking up reviews on such venues as Goodreads, and it really seems like people like this novel.
Well, she's a good writer.
Who are many of them brought to it by fandom of the movie. Or some version of
one
the movie.
One of the movies,
right?
yeah. Because there's actually another remake,
with
right?
Susan Hayward. I don't think that's a Ross Hunter. He would be the auteur of that one, so at some point we should watch it.
Yeah, it's from the 60s.
It would be very interesting to see it, to kind of look at the Cirque films also as Ross Hunter films. Because
Sure.
Ross Hunter himself seems like an interesting and very different auteur presence. Fannie Hurst, I was looking up her enormous Wikipedia entry again, because I haven't read it all the way through. And what's fascinating about her in connection with this story, and which made me decide, yes, at some point I have to read the novel, is that she was a radically independent feminist. She was a radical about women's independence. She herself kept her marriage a secret, didn't change her name, and lived separately from her husband, although they were married for many years, and also had an important affair with another man during their marriage. But she seems to have been completely devoted to him. She was outspoken, like when it came out about her strange marriage, she started soapboxing about the need for women to maintain their independence and maintain their own lives within marriage. It's fascinating that she writes a story which is almost a kind of horror story about a woman who utterly loses her independence and selfhood to a relationship.
I think it is a horror story, right? It gets at its horror through a very interesting route by showing you the best case scenario, the absolute best case scenario for a kept woman, because this is a guy who's almost worthy of her, maybe.
Yeah,
let's say.
It's really interesting how he kind of goes in and out from scene to scene.
More and more as the movie goes along, he realizes how important she is to him. At first, he's pretty clueless. He's more John Bowlesy at the beginning than at the end. This is the first time I've really bothered to take that much notice of John Bowles.
He's really effective at the end. Stahl really gets some stuff out of him in that death scene.
Very few directors,
And Freund, too. Freund is really working overtime at the end there with both actors in their age makeup.
Really good, and most of the time, unfortunately, Bowles is only asked to do the first part of his act, which is to be kind of...
a useless male.
Yeah, likable, but absolutely
handsome-ish.
Hopeless. Well, I think he was more than handsome-ish. He was definitely supposed to be one of the handsomest men in Hollywood, I think.
He's got a weird face shape.
I'm not really sure, but I feel like audiences at the time thought he was one of the best-looking guys in Hollywood.
Okay. He's no Gary Cooper. So, when I first heard about this film before I saw it, I read some kind of feminist criticism. I think it might have been academic feminist criticism. And I'm talking like when I was 20 or something. And it just made it sound like a movie, well, what I just described, about a woman completely losing her selfhood and completely losing her sense of identity and independence. And it kind of generalized from that to the weepy genre.
Right.
And the way it was described, it just made me afraid to watch it. And like a lot of these movies are punishing these 30s women's pictures. Of course, Letter from an Unknown Woman being another one. They're just absolutely punishing to watch as a woman, and I'm sure as anyone who's entering into the perspective of the heroine.
Yeah.
Like, it was harder to watch in a way than Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Yeah, I mean, Murders in the Rue Morgue is a really interesting film, but I think this is a greater movie.
It does seem like it's pretty magnificent.
The stereotype of the weeper genre is that it exacts some kind of revenge on women, usually for committing a major social indiscretion. This movie has none of that.
Well, Fannie Hurst, who's very, very progressive. If anything, this kind of... It's funny you should mention the Twilight Zone earlier, because at the end I was thinking this is almost like a Twilight Zone episode that asks the question, women like this, is it worth it? Everything they give up, is it worth it or not? Let's zero in on this sociological figure of the kept woman. Were her sacrifices worth it? And the movie doesn't really answer that. It leaves it interestingly ambiguous the whole time. For her, too, she doesn't know either.
No.
Much more so than, of course, like the utterly delusional heroine of Letter from an Unknown Woman.
Well, yeah, that's a totally different case. If this is a very self-possessed woman, she has very definite ideas about what she wants out of life and what she expects from people, and also about her duties to other women particularly, right? It's like there's so much...
Even when it fucks her over.
Well, yeah, that's when you know that you're really committed to your ideals, right? So she misses the most important date of her life, as she and her sister agree, because she has to sort out her sister's love life before a suicide occurs. I mean, I don't know how many weepers really do actually moralize about a woman's out-of-wedlock sexual activity,
Well,
but this
if
film
there's a baby-
certainly does not.
If there's a baby, the baby has to die, usually, or else she has to not be able to raise it.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see if that's just a stereotype, and most of them are actually far more progressive, but certainly this one is. Like, it assumes that its audience, whatever their opinions outside the cinema are, they are going to watch this movie and side with Irene Dunne all the way and not blame her for anything that's happened.
Well, we saw Susan Lennox, right?
Yeah.
Was very interesting also for the way that the heroine kind of internalizes the punishments that are meted out to her within the film, but it, in no way is the film blaming her for anything.
Yeah, I think it's probably more often than not the case that these films weren't propaganda designed to
Teach women to
stay within the
stay
marital
within
bounds.
moral boundaries.
Yeah, I think, because that makes it seem
Well,
like women don't know what's good for them, right? I think women loved these movies because they were telling women, hey, we understand that you are multifaceted and you can't be judged so easily by these criteria. We're gonna make films that show you these protagonists in the best possible light, really. Maybe as someone who runs afoul of social conventions, but not as someone that is guilty in the eyes of anything beyond that.
We've seen what a propaganda for women to not sexually stray film looks like. The one I always bring
Ex-Lady.
up, Ex-Lady.
Yeah.
But it's not a weepy.
No, not at all, right?
It's a movie about a woman. The whole plot is that she very deliberately has decided to have a modern marriage, and the plot teaches her why she shouldn't do
yeah,
that.
I don't think Ex-Lady is a woman's picture
No,
at
not
all.
at all.
No, these
I don't know
women's
whose picture it is.
These women's pictures actually generally do have positive portrayals of their characters, no matter what kinds of predicaments they find themselves in.
Well, what's really terrible, of course, is that you see Irene Dunn's character
Ray Schmidt
over and over again making a choice that hurts her autonomy.
Well, again, this is kind of It's a Wonderful Life-ish, right? Instead of, well, they'll vote with Potter otherwise, instead it's, I'll throw myself out the window, sis.
I mean, in relation to him, continually gives herself and other women feminist pep talks about how this relationship is terrible and how he's slighting her within it.
Right.
And he makes her give up her job and then any hope of having a child.
Yeah, can't do that.
Every time she returns to the relationship as soon as he shows up again. The scene after that summer where she hardly hears from him and he's been in Europe, forced to go with his wife by his father-in-law for appearance's sake, for optics.
Yeah.
And he comes back and then she's realized how empty her life is because she's deliberately emptied it out so that he's the only thing in it. So she asks him, can I at least have a child? And he says, no way, that would look terrible if anyone found out.
You're not thinking straight.
Finally, she's like, fuck this, right? And then finally accepts not her sweetheart, her friend.
Yeah.
Her friend who's in love with her, the other man who's the other suitor who's waiting in the wings.
Who's become an automobile magnate.
Yeah, and he seems super nice, and they have nice times together, we see that. She goes home and she's about to marry him, and then when John Bowles shows up at the door, as that's all about to happen, it was like a horror movie. It was like the thing that you kill, the monster that you kill that keeps coming back. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And that's like the worst part. After that, he actually does, as you say, get a little bit better. Like, she's actually shocked him enough with her willingness to leave him that...
Yeah, for sure.
That he does step up a little bit, because from that point on, she is his shadow, as the observing women say. And also follows him all over the world.
She also does take a very important role, apparently, in helping him, or maybe just writing his speeches for him.
Although he's such a dope that he says that it took him a long time for him to even notice that she had changed his speeches.
Yeah, because probably they were talking it through, and this is something that comes up in old movies all the time, right? Like, this is the way women exert power. They ask through a process of kind of Socratic questioning. They bring out the answer that they want, or they bring out the speech that she wants or she thinks that he should give. I don't know. Like, we don't ever get to see those sessions in action, but that's what I'm assuming, is that she guided him towards, so he wrote down the words, but it's because she basically put the thoughts in his head.
She's allowed to share more of his life and also to do challenging intellectual work by sharing some of his work, but she's not allowed to and would never think to take any credit for it.
No, I know. It's terrible.
I just find it fascinating that a woman who was so, in her own life, assertive and stood up for herself in all areas and claimed credit for everything that she did, that she creates a character like this, who is, of course, I mean, arguably, I don't know how typical a character this is. This is still a very privileged woman to be the mistress of this banker.
Right, and her other option, romantic option, is Henry Ford. So no, this is not realism, per se. Quite apart from either of them, she is the highest-ranking female employee at her firm when she meets John Bowles. When she meets him again, anyway. Because she starts out, she's the assistant to her dad at his shop. And she does all the accounts for this guy who's going to become like this great industrialist.
So she's already doing it. She's already unobtrusively, without asking for credit, helping the male genius or magnate or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So this is her lot from the beginning. She is propping up all of these men. Everywhere she goes, men find backbones and are able to succeed.
The horror movie element of this is obvious, and you'd think that Fannie Hurst would, being who she was, make it into more of a cautionary tale, but she decides not to do that. She makes it, like I said, ambiguous.
Right, well, I think that's...
It's not just a feminist moral lesson.
No, that's what makes it a great film, because it is also...
And a painful film.
It's giving you a sense not only of everything that's wrong with this arrangement, but also it makes you see why some women have chosen to do this, because it does bring something into her life. It's certainly not, I don't think... Does
it bring something into her life that is better than what she could have achieved? I mean, the only thing it brings into her life is that, as she tells her friend early on, when I love, it's going to be completely, and look out.
Yeah.
All it brings her is that she has the person that she loves.
Right,
well... later in the film, when it really gets into the social question of her being maligned by his priggish son, and her not being able to be present at his death, I kept thinking of a modern or more recent parallel being gay relationships before gay marriage was legalized.
Yeah.
It's that degree of having to keep an emotionally important relationship hidden. And to the degree that we see the reasons for John Bowles' side of things, why he has done this so frequent patriarchal thing of having a wife and a mistress. The answer is that his marriage is virtually an arranged marriage because it's marrying into the business.
Known her since they were kids. She was picked out for him by his mother and by the wife's family, and it's just...
His father-in-law is his boss, apparently.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's obvious in this version, but...
No, this is how things work. This is how class systems retain their integrity, right? It's like a royal marriage.
So it's not so much that... The way in which he is, because he is, abusive, is not so much in setting up this arrangement as in literally asking her to give everything up.
Right.
And asking her, like, in so many words, or telling her.
Well, yeah.
He won't even let her earn money.
No, it hurts him to find out
any kind.
That she went in for decorating china and selling it.
Although that's her passive-aggressive way of saying, you forgot to pay me.
Yeah, exactly. He took an extra month vacation in Switzerland and didn't send her the check to pay for food. So she improvised and sold.
It really is just patriarchy as a suffocating nightmare.
It is, for sure.
And yet love exists within this.
Yeah, well, again, I think that's got to be part of any artistic examination of this, right? It doesn't belong in a tract. It's very easy to just say patriarchy, here's what it does.
But she does
all of
say
these things are bad.
Point.
Yeah, she knows these things, but she also is in love with this guy, and it does bring something to her to have that. And if you don't recognize the power of that, then you're not going to have very effective lectures anyway. You have to know what you're fighting, I think. And there's a lot of internalized, genuine emotion that comes from these very misguided wellsprings that has to be acknowledged before you can effectively change society. I don't think Backstreet could do that all by itself, But it's certainly... And again, it does give you the worst case scenario, or maybe not the worst, but a pretty bad case, right? Like, just across the hall from Irene Dunne is her neighbor who gets set on fire in an accident, gets a little bit burned on her cheek, and is, after that, damaged goods, and her paramour never comes back to see her ever again. And she's just abandoned. And only Irene Dunne cares about her. And this is certainly just as likely to happen to you as to get a John Bowles who is going to be a little bit reflective and actually value the bargain that he has made.
Yeah, but it's not just being reflective. It's he won't let her go when she tries to go. It would be better if he weren't, I guess, so in love with her.
Right.
But would it be better? This is the question. It really makes you start thinking toward the end, what is a happy life?
Yeah, exactly.
She is sad. She's miserable. She's glamorously, sexily miserable, the way she's styled by Stahl and by Freund in these sequences when she's basically decided the rest of my life I'm going to be this mistress. And she's wealthy enough. He gives her enough money to dress really nicely.
Yeah, but very little, right? When the son finds out what she gets per month, he can't believe it. And he realizes, okay, this is obviously not any kind of a gold digger. This is someone that's been with my dad for 25 years out of genuine emotional attachment.
But anyway, she's pretty nicely dressed.
Yeah.
And she's wandering around in veils on ships. And she looks sad and mournful in, as I say, a very glamorous way. But you keep asking yourself the question of, as I'm sure she does, what kind of life would be better? What kind of life would be more... She thinks the life that would be more fulfilling, we find this out at the end, but we've always known it, is alternate universe had occurred.
Yeah, I really love that, right? All of a sudden we get another timeline at the end, a possible deviation.
Where they had been able to be together and be married. And that's the part where it's most like Letter from an Unknown Woman, where she has this fantasy that there could have been a life where they were happy together, and that is what keeps her, that more than anything she's given up, is what keeps her from being happy in the life that she does have. And she doesn't think that there's any other, except for that alternate universe, there's no other life that could have made her happier than she is. But it's also, of course, the happiness is always on the horizon, or over the horizon, beyond the blue horizon, I don't know. But the idea that we keep ourselves from being happy because we think that there is some version of happiness that we're not attaining.
There's a telos that we haven't reached.
Yeah.
It's interesting that she does not project a third alternate future or alternate life where she actually became president of her firm or something like that. Like, that is not on the menu.
She doesn't want to be jobless because she doesn't want to not be occupied. But no, she is... It's clear that she is interested in love. She is not interested in...
Yeah, she doesn't derive any particular
being a career woman.
Joy from professional competence.
Yes, but she wants to be able to use her mind. Like, it's driving
Yeah.
her crazy that she is in this position where she can't do anything.
Right. It's a staggering film, I think. It's a really great entree into Stahl's sound women's pictures, and going to go on a great run of them. We are going to cover a lot of them as we go along, because they're either going to come up as Margaret Sullivan movies, or we're going to do them in the studios year by year. I'm really going to try to go through the whole book as we go along. There's a lot of scholarly interest in Stahl all of a sudden.
Which is great.
Yeah, and hopefully that will lead to releases of all those silent films that currently you have to fly to London to see or something. Karl Freund also shot this film, so he did both of the movies we're talking about this week.
And it's very subtle. Like, as I say, Stahl's style at this point is a non-style.
I suppose so. It is very interesting. You don't see this very often, that alternate reality ending.
As I say, almost every episode. So I'm watching this weepy in an analytical frame of mind because I know we're going to be talking about it. I'm like, oh, it's not going to work on me. It's not going to work on me. I hate this. I hate this. I'm watching these movies like this. And I mean, okay, some movies completely overpower that, like The Cloud Cap Star. But anyway, for this one, I was like, it's just not going to work on me. I'm thinking about it too much. Where it hit was as soon as the sun leaves, and they've got that great old lady. Well, what they've done, actually, the stuff he does with aging is pretty interesting at the end. So she looks like a glamorous woman in her late 40s or early 50s, right? Basically still looks like Irene Dunne with gray hair.
Yeah.
And same with John Bowles. But then, after he dies...
Then she looks very haggard.
She looks like she's 60.
Yeah.
fully 60. And then the son comes and visits her. Yeah, let's talk about that scene.
No, it's an incredible coda.
The son, who has had a change of heart on his father's deathbed because the father asks for her, comes to see her. He wants to make sure she's provided for. The idea of this family continuing to provide her with an allowance because there's nothing she can do now seems just gross and tawdry and awful. Don't you think? Like, from her perspective.
Sure, I guess, but it would be even worse for them not to help her.
But it seems, I don't know, to me it just seemed like I'm not surprised by what ensues.
Right, well...
It's not a good solution for her to go on in loneliness being supported by the family of the man whose mistress she was.
No, I agree, and the film...
I mean, he should have set something up for her if something was going to happen, but he even fucked that up.
No, he never thinks.
But on the other hand, he seems like a pretty young fellow. I don't think he thought he was going to suddenly have a stroke.
Right, exactly.
But he never thinks, no.
No, he never makes any plans for the future.
He loves, but he doesn't think.
He never accounts for what his actions are going to do and what the needs of his marriage are going to do to Irene Dunn's life when he's not there.
And this is a real Fannie Hurst nightmare of what if a woman just does completely allow herself to be supported by a man who's not even legally claimed by her.
Right.
She has no legal claims on him.
Yeah, no, so I agree. Again, this is another double-edged sword, this final scene, because the son really does make the best gesture possible under the circumstances, and she recognizes that, and I think that she is telling the truth to the picture when she turns to John Bowles.
When she turns and starts talking to John Bowles in this pathetic...
He was so nice.
This pathetic, like literally pathetic as a rhetorical term, broken language of infancy. That's when I started bawling.
How can you not? When she says he came to see me and he was so nice, it's like the tears have to flow.
And then we get the alternate universe and the restored young versions of them at the bandstand. And I thought, like, to me, this screams volumes that somebody, either the director or Richard Matheson of Somewhere in Time, had to have at least unconsciously had Backstreet in mind for that ending.
That's interesting. Richard Matheson also was heavily associated with the Twilight Zone, which always has nostalgic bandstands and parks. It's all part of the same matrix, I guess.
Sure. That is a version of a man whose life ought to be very professionally full, but it is completely empty without this idea of a woman that he's fallen in love with.
You could argue that she has become a kind of transcendental hermit, Gertrude-style character through this relationship. I think that's probably the best case you could put upon it. But if it can all be undercut by the death of the man, then it's a very tenuous transcendence.
Well, but also, I mean, I think that's more true of Letter from an Unknown Woman, where this woman has, within the confines of patriarchy, she has made a mental construct that provides her with a very meaningful life, although she herself is not able to emotionally coincide with its meaning.
Right. And she marries and has a child, but she remains devoted more to this ethereal experience that she had.
This is more like a portrait of, like, the emphasis on the daily emptiness of her life whenever he's not there is so great. And whenever he is there, let's face it, he's totally inadequate. She can't stand what he does and says whenever he's there.
I guess they must be having good times, right? And he does like to...
No, I'm going with a theory here that actually, in fact, it's when he's not there and she's imagining him that he's so great. And when he actually, like, shows up...
That's possible, yeah.
There never is a time where she's perfectly happy, not even when he's there.
No, it's true, but we do see...
It's more like a mystical emptiness that she's achieved.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was aiming for there, right? With the transcendental hermit. It's a kind of negative theology that she is adhering to.
Well, we'll talk about that more when we do Next Time We Love, which is actually a weird, radical feminist movie that nevertheless has some of the same elements of these women's pictures.
Also a Universal film.
Because that one really does seem like somehow achieving the state of Gertrude, but within a marriage.
Yeah, a lot to think about. It'll be interesting. It'll be not much more than a year before we get to the Margaret Sullivan Backstreet, and we'll see how it changes in the post-code era.
These women's pictures of the 30s are very interesting works of art, and Yeah, they are supposed to be painful, and they really need to be given more analysis as a genre, not just strictly through a condemnatory feminist lens. Although I'm not quite sure, I can't even remember now, it being so long ago, whether that article I read was condemning the movie or just describing it.
Yeah, usually it's just describing it, right? But one thing that I usually detect from anything written about these is that they are interpreted as propaganda aimed at keeping women's expectations down. And it's just such a terrible way of thinking about the movies and thinking about those audiences who obviously knew what they wanted to see and had pretty good ideas about what they wanted to see, had much more fully thought through conceptions of their lot rather than just being these passive recipients of patriarchal messages.
One thing I thought of while watching it, I couldn't help it. I doubt that the book, okay, I'm 100% sure from all that has been said about it. I have never read 50 Shades of Grey, but I'm sure it is not in the same league as Fannie Hurst. Certainly not in terms of thought. Who knows in terms of writing? Haven't read either. I did think, watching this movie, about the reception of that film. The books are phenomenally popular among women.
Yeah.
But the movie was just viciously attacked by #feminists on Twitter. And there was just a meme spreading around about how it, despite the fact that it's read by women and it was written by a woman, that it was
indoctrination,
advocating abuse of women.
Right.
And this was just everywhere. People who had never read the books, people who had never seen the film, were just parroting this idea, of Twitter users anyway. And broadly, it's the same archetype. Very broadly, it's the same archetype, which is that there is a man, a powerful man, who comes into your life and adores and worships you. And for that reason, but also treats you badly. And for that reason, you are willing to do things you never wanted to do or thought possible for him. In that case, it's indulge his S&M fetishes.
Right.
But the narrative of the series is this more of a Clarissa and Lovelace kind of battle of wills, as far as I know. I haven't read the books, but I have looked up the plots on Wikipedia.
Didn't you see the movie?
I did see the movie too. It's this ongoing. I found it fascinating that the actress is
Melanie Griffith's daughter.
Dakota Fanning?
No, Johnson.
No, Dakota Fanning.
Don Johnson, right?
Right. So, there's this lineage from Marnie to Brian De Palma, Body Double to 50 Shades of Grey. That's pretty much the reason I went to see it, because I thought that was great.
Oh, you should write an article on that.
Almost should, someday. But yeah, so there's this battle of wills where, on the one hand, because he adores her, she submits to him, but then she's repelled by this dark side, and also by the fact that she doesn't want to do it in the first place. And so then she runs off, and then he comes back and he says he's going to reform, but then they get pulled back into this because he can't, overcome this dark maleness of his, dark male sexuality. And so it's this fight of, is he going to force her to submit to him, or is she going to tame the beast, basically? Right. Which I think is really fascinating as a female fantasy. Abuse discourse, whether the writing is any good or not, is kind of immaterial. It's abuse discourse aimed at films that speak to women's fantasies, and fantasies that also speak to real social conditions in certain ways, is inadequate.
It's definitely inadequate, although I confess to finding the Backstreet situation a lot more interesting, because it's so much more muted, right? John Bowles is not whipping her all the time. He's just forgetting about her completely.
And yet it's almost like it's just as bad.
Well, yeah, of course.
You feel the impact just as much. Not whipping her, but forcing her to give up a child and forcing her to give up work. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, if Ritwik Ghatak was directing the film, there would have been the sound of lashes when she got those anonymous postcards. And I do think that is an aspect of patriarchy that often goes under the radar, right? This compartmentalization, this mania for everything in its place, rather than, the brutish abuser, which certainly exists. There's a lot of brutish abusers out there, but I think even more the problem is absent-mindedness about...
Yeah, no one's better at portraying that than John Bowles. I mean, the moment where he seems most monstrous is where she's about to escape the relationship, and he comes back, and she can't do it. But it's from that point on that you start to realize that he's actually not a monster.
No, he's just another person under patriarchy who has all of the flaws that are inculcated in male subjects.
Yeah, and that's kind of almost worse.
Yeah. So next week, we're going to be headed back to Setsukohara for the Acturist Oeuvre Review. We're going to be talking about 1949's The Blue Mountains, or anyway, that's one of the translated titles for that film. And 1949's Late Spring, Ozu.
Oh, terrific.
One of my very favorite films, so I'm looking forward to this.
Another film about people giving up normal lives for love, so that'll be interesting.
Yes. All right. See you soon.